How y'all doing? For this book review, I'm going to go over a fantasy book. Some people consider it a classic in the sword and sorcery genre, others not so much. With a writer that some people today have a bit of a, feel controversial about. I don't see why, since everyone's about that story's dead, but I digress. And that is the Tritonian Ring by Sprague, deCamp. Now, I already have a copy of this in a collection of it, which I think is Sci-Fi Gateway books, but he just put a yellow cover with small snippets of this. I saw this at a used bookstore, and not only is it very much a very kick-ass cover, it also has some interior artwork by the same thing. Now, about this book, this was originally published in two complete science fiction adventure books in 1951. This is where you bought a paperback that had two complete stories. In this case, you can find the Tritonian Ring with H.G. Wells' The Time Machine as an example of it found. Back in 1951, that's how it first started. He later, in 1953, expanded, revised, and made a complete version of this as standalone. This copy that I have here, illustrated by James Cawthorne and George Barr, two fantasy artists, at the time. This is from 1977. Now, there are some interior illustrations, throughout. It's a bit racy here. I don't want to show that, but it's like a case in point right here. For those of you, George Barr, I didn't know about him by name, but but when I looked him up, I've seen his artwork on many old paperbacks of science fiction and fantasy, particularly fantasy. James Cawthorne I already knew about because he worked with Michael Moorcock. He was the first illustrator of Elric, so there's that. But that's just the background of the book here. What's the story about? Our story is set up in a distant past of an alternative history, alternative prehistory, similar to how Robert Howard created his Hyborian Age. Now, Sprague deCamp tried to put more logic into it, and with more accurate histories and development of such civilizations. He set up a Bronze Age culture, so there's no iron, at this point. And these cultures are sort of predecessors to our ancient cultures, like the Greeks and all that. And you can see that as you explore this world that he's made. Now, he did put in some that's more fantastical, like he set up Atlantis. In this case, it's called Poesidonis. And so you can sort of see by taking those elements into his fictional world and imagine as time went by how some of these words that are mentioned will be distorted or changed into something else that the ancient people use later on. So, with that said, starts off with the gods of this world conversing with one another, saying, and they say, hey, in this kingdom of Poesidonis, in the continent of Poesidonis, which is sinking, mind you, Atlantis here, and in the kingdom of Lorsk, there's a man who, through is destined to be the end of it's going to be the start of our destruction, be the end of us. We got to stop him. Now, they can't converse with him directly because he's sort of spiritually obtuse. They can't communicate with him through dreams and all that. So what they've done is they're getting the king of the Gorgon Isles to raise an army and attack the king of Lorsk, hopefully ending the prince there that will later defeat them. Come a couple of scenes later, we are talking to the king of Lorsk and his two sons that who are rivals of one another. His younger son, either way, one of his sons, Prince Vakar, is one who is our main protagonist of the story. And bringing up an oracle, he is told that in order for us to stop this attack that's happening, Prince Vakar has to go on a mission to find the thing that the gods fear most. So that's this quest. He's got to search around for to an unknown destination, to an item that he doesn't know what to find that would be as a threat to the gods. So he's off. He has to, of course, he's not entirely alone. He's with his slave, who was enslaved because he was a thief, Fall, and his brother sent to him a translator. So, but he's at odds with his brother, so the translator ended up being an assassin, and that's at the earliest start of this. So, this is one of those books that he always goes from location to location, gets into a rut or gets on a small little task that will eventually give him one step further to what he needs to find out. He finds other oracles or wizards and stuff like that. He goes through a whole list of adventures here. a lot of the things that Prince Varkar goes through. He's being chased by priests of the Gorgon Isles that to try and stop him on his journey. So he has to have so he has that obstacle as he travels along. He visits the queen of a kingdom who later becomes his love interest, and there was an assassination attempt involving a spell putting bringing a serpent carved on a throne to life and tried to attack him. Sometime later he's now stuck on an he crashes on an island with his companion, well, his slave is also that's with him. The villagers are trying to get to overcome, try to be hospitable at first. Later it's just a ruse so they can take him out and take whatever they have of him. They are helped by a female satyr who, in exchange for her help, they will take her to a place where she is not so persecuted by the elders of that, being a satyr and all. Other things, he's sent on a task to recover a wizard in a trance state to this other sorcerer whose help he needs to find out what the gods fear, and it's guarded by a demon. And so he has that, and so it's things like this, venture to venture to where he hopefully gets where he needs. Now, he later finds out that the thing the gods fear is the Tritonian Ring, as the title of the book is. Okay, it sounds kind of obvious. Then it turns around a little bit. Let me explain. The Tritonian Ring is owned by the ruler of Lake Tritonis, so he has to travel south. And this is where it starts to get to places more Africa-like and all that. So he finds Lake Tritonis, and he finds the ruler, and apparently the people of this area are now split between men and women who are now or fighting each other brutally, might I add. This is not just a quarrel of slap fights. This is actually fought war between the two. And Prince Varkar offers to find a way to unite the two in exchange for the Tritonian Ring. Then eventually he succeeds, but they try to backstab him, so he, escaping that, he loses access to the ring. But he does find out where that ring, the material that ring comes from, so he goes to the wizard who has that. The Tritonian Ring is made out of what is called star metal, and since this, in other words, it's made out of iron. And there's a certain property iron has in this world that they don't know about. So he goes to this wizard who builds these constructs of undead, where it's just headless bodies with an eye at their in their necks as their only way of seeing, and they're possessed by demons, but they're completely under the control of whoever owns them. He's trying to make that, and but he goes tries to coax the emperor and all that, and tries to sneak up this material, the star material that he needs to help with his quest. And after getting out of that, he finally now he comes across goes across a territory to warn the people. As he's crossing his territory, he could have went around, but he decides to warn the people that there's these raiders out to get him, and they arrest him for pretty silly crimes. I'll get to that shortly. He later escapes, finds the smith who can forge this star metal into whatever he wants. He didn't make he says, okay, you can if you can make this sword for me, I'll use it. That'll be what I ask for. You can keep the rest. And then later he goes straight back home to help his people against the oncoming army. How's the star metal going to help? I'm not going to get too much of that. You can find spoilers somewhere else. I don't want to spoil it for you, but that's kind of shorthanding it. There's still plenty of things about it that is makes it a very enjoyable read. Now, I read this. It's a relatively quick read, and as many of these stories at the time were. And this, and this hardcover book is only like less than just below 240 pages. Paperbacks, would be accordingly. Old stories like this weren't 400 to 800 pages. This is where it's straight to the point. Now, again, I enjoyed it. If I had a flaw about this, it's my similar complaint I have about Edgar Rice Burroughs. The ending happens real quick. I mean, the last couple chapters, you got the final fight, the climax, and it just kind of ends. But to be fair, in this one, the way how he sort of structured things, things that are already in a couple chapters previously, or are already said, so you don't need to add it to the end, and you can see where things you already know where things go through at the end. It's a happy ending, at least for the main character, With that said, Sprague deCamp is one of those that a lot of people either really like or they have sort of contempt for him, particularly his work of Robert Howard. I won't get into that. I think it's kind of pointless with everyone dead, and what's done is done, and you can get whatever he distorted, as far as Robert Howard goes, in Del Rey books, as a Howard stories only. But I digress. Now I'm going to read this article I found at blackgate.com. It's an article of Logical Sword and Sorcery, the Tritonian Ring by Sprague deCamp. I'll link it down below. I'm not going to read the whole thing because a part of it has a summary, which I already more or less did. It'll give you more details than I did in this one because I want to see if you want to take time to read it for yourself, and as far as classic literature goes. Now, this one is one that criticizes Sprague deCamp's book, and I'll read part. Not that it's all bad. It's his honest review. It's his opinion. Let him have it. It's written in 2016, so if you want to read this and make a comment, please don't be mean about it. I would suggest just read it, take it in. You could agree or don't agree, but probably read the book first and make your own opinion about this. With that said, I'll take some choice parts about this in the later half of this article here. Let's see. This is the most enjoyable, artistically successful aspect of Tritonian Ring. deCamp posits exactly what magic-using Bronze Age antediluvian world would look like. Writing is still in its infancy and iron is unknown. Most kings and queens live at a level of comfort barely above that of their subjects. Instead of a jumble of classical medieval trappings and technologies, Poesidonis, and their various places in this book feel like that of Mycenae and the early city-states of the Fertile Crescent. There are no knights in shining armor, only spearmen in chariots. It's a wonderful achievement that I am very much impressed with. In creating such a realistic world, I expect a story similarly realistic, or at least sober-minded. But that's not what deCamp delivered. In the introduction to deCamp's literary swordsmen and sorcerers, the makers of heroic fantasy, Lynn Carter wrote, deCamp is too sane and civilized really to believe in heroes per se. He knows enough about history to realize that too often the heroes of this world, from Richard Francis Burton to Lawrence of Arabia, act in what seems to observers as heroic manner because of inner weaknesses, compulsions, or desperate needs to overcompensate for what they dread is cowardice or less than complete masculinity. Knowing this, he finds it difficult to create fictional heroes who do not suffer from something which serves to guide them into acting like heroes. Incurable gas pains, post-nasal drips, deviated septums, or a galloping mother fixation, let us say. From the outset, deCamp seems constitutionally unable to believe in the sort of bold and fearless characters of the same stripe as Conan. deCamp clearly feels a greater affinity for the clever man than the brave man, and though some effort was made to make Vakar heroic, it always rings hollow. Now there's room for clever, even cowardly heroes, sword sorcerer, but Vakar comes off as more of a ventriloquist dummy through which deCamp can voice his opinion on the natural gullibility, greediness, and cowardice of people. Incidences of Vakar's cleverness feel like the author reeling off some tidbit of historical information. We get to read in detail how a galley works, and in the middle of horrible massacre, how to mount a guide a camel. deCamp seems incapable of silently independent in himself, and is always taking steam out of the action in one authorial lecture after another. I didn't find this part attractive when he goes into that, because it's... Think about yourself in that same situation. If you're on a boat, how do you run a boat? If you have no experience in it, especially an older style boat, or how do you run a camel? Flaws in how it's structured into the story you could probably make, but I don't see that as a bad thing. Moving on. The worst part and most irritating part of Tritonian Ring is the alleged comedy. From Lynn Carter, we learned that P.G. Wodehouse and Thorne Smith were among deCamp's favorite authors, particularly with Jeeves and Rooster. Wodehouse wrote some of the most critical acclaimed humor in the English language. Thorne Smith, best known for writing Topper, and might feel dated today, but again, he was a skilled craftsman writing funny. For deCamp, comedy rarely rises above cowardice and juvenile bawdiness. Vakar is always threatening his slave fowl with some dire punishment for the latter's perpetual gutlessness. Instead of being genuinely fearful of his life, Fall is portrayed as a shirker, making an implausible excuse for his absences during battles. Queen Porphia and the satyrists are lusty and insatiable, which leads to several weak jokes. There's an lame attempt at a satire in the later chapters of Tritonian Ring. After traveling through mostly realistic kingdoms and towns, Vakar suddenly finds himself negotiating a peace between Tritons and Amazons. Once a single tribe, they split male and female tribes over household politics. It is simplistic and not funny. That's not a subject for humor way, but do you actually know any women or real live people way? I'll get to that shortly. Even worse is the land where foreigners are forbidden lest they upset the perfect order that they have achieved. Intruders and Gamphansantia are condemned to meet in their fate in the arena. Sorry if I mispronounce this. Gamphansans practice their absolute pacifism. They themselves don't harm or kill dumb beasts in the arena just do that what they do, and consider themselves so advanced they believe they easily convince a tribe of raiders not to kill them. Not only is this not funny, it completely undermines the believability camp seems to be striving for. Well, what was he expecting? Douglas Adams or Mel Brooks about that? Humor is subjective. I found, I put a smirk on my face. I found it amusing, and life is not always, consistent in such things. So, writers got to take risk on these things. You could put in a serious story and add humor about this. I don't know why it has to be, why you have to follow strict rules that you have to keep the same tone always. I take it for what the writer, has presented himself. He wasn't, he's not Robert E. Howard, but that's a whole different subject altogether. All right, moving on. Let's see. Finally, the book collapses as it rushes to a conclusion. Agreed. The meddlesome gods vanish. Vakar retraces his footsteps far too rapidly in an invasion of Lorsk. All occur in only a chapter or two. It's very unsatisfying. I'm used to that with Edgar Rice Burroughs, but it leads to an ending, and okay, something you just don't do in modern books. Okay, times change. Let's see. The Tritonian Ring is an interesting artifact from the early days of post-Howardian sword and sorcery. The world building is impeccable and interesting. I enjoy a book that draws on the real world's Bronze Age civilizations for its inspiration instead of the same old generic European ones. deCamp's extensive historical knowledge rings off every page, helping make Posada one of the most detailed and believable fantasy worlds I've read. There's real vim and vigor to early chapters, but deCamp's lecturing and penchant for not funny always intrudes. Unfortunately, the attempts at comedy trash it all. First and foremost, it just doesn't make me laugh, chortle, or even snort. Again, comedy subjective. Humor was, people had, this could have been very, funny for its time, back then. Instead, my eyes rolled and I rushed and turned the page hoping things would improve, which they rarely did. Secondly, it doesn't work with the detailed realism Posada. Perhaps if deCamp was striven for a deeper kind of comedy that really tries to expose the foibles of self-delusional nature of mankind, it could have. Instead, there are unfunny jokes, glibsonesses, and entire characterizations. This is a book, one of the very few I reviewed, in which I unequivocally state do not read. I usually suggest you read it whether I like it or not, pick a book, that, if you think this is fascinating, go ahead and read it. Otherwise, okay, move on to something else. With that said, you can see, he finds it very unsatisfying, but, and deCamp's kind of weird that way. I looked up other reviews like Goodreads.com. There are many people who are fans of deCamp, and there are some people who are not for various reasons. This is a story of the 1950s. He's reading up books around that time period. You notice there's a lot of similarities that you as a modern reader would like. This would never work today. It wouldn't work as as many readers expect how books written today are supposed to be written, and publishers don't strive to get those type of things. And yeah, maybe there is some flaws about this, but it's not be something to be say don't read this stuff at all. Try and here's some of the things that I tend to think about. As far as the heroic character part of this article, if you gotta make it, not necessarily make it fresh, but go in different directions, because we already have Robert Howard's Conan, and when these types of stories and heroic fantasy and sword and sorcery were taken about, you had a lot of copycats and knockoffs trying to make the same thing in their own different way. And yeah, that's what makes a genre stand out and what draws people towards it, but it gets very old very fast. When Tolkien made a huge boom, there was many books that tried to have that same, almost type of copycats, some more than others, at a type of fantasy. with what I do like about Prince Varkar is that he's not this boisterous, bombastic, braggart type, stereotypical barbarian that we know of. It's a different direction, and he has flaws, and as looked upon this, he's kind of a believable character like that. You may see some of yourself on how he tries to, while he can do heroic deeds, his feelings, he can feel fear about it. He doesn't come out, haha and all that. And it's like, I'm just glad that he's got it over with, despite what he has to push through. Now, this part about the people of Lake Tritonis, about the men and the females, going after each other, he doesn't find that funny, and it kind of takes away the realism. Might I suggest Lysistrata by Aristophanes, that Greek play about women withholding any sexual privileges until the men in the Peloponnesian War stopped fighting. I mean, granted, that's a play and all that, but such an idea is, it's kind of an amusing idea, and you want to see how it works. But as far as other aspects about that, of not being funny, again, I found a part about the Naked Puritans, as the chapter is called. Let me read that part for you. Okay, let's see. Let's see. Vakar had seen enough nudity in his life, not to be impressed by it, but he still found the sight of a nation's highest court meeting in a state incongruous. It was a morning after his arrival at Tokelat. His interpreter said in Hesperonian, "You are accused of being a foreigner. What have you to say about that?" "Of course I'm a foreigner. How can I help where I was born?" "You may not be able to help where you were born," said the judge through the interpreter, "but you can help. But you can help coming to Gamphasentia, where it is illegal for outlanders to trespass." "Why is that?" "The Gamphasentia are a virtuous people, and fear that commerce with barbarian nations would corrupt our purity." "I did not know about your silly law." "Ignorance of the law is no excuse. You could have inquired among the neighboring nations before you were so rashly invaded our forbidden land. We will therefore stipulate you are a foreigner. Next, you are accused of carrying weapons of Gamphasentia. What do you say?" "Of course I carried a sword. All travelers are permitted into civilized countries. Not in Gamphasentia, in which is the only truly civilized country. As no Gamphasent ever takes life, there is no reason why anybody should go armed, save when a farmer in an outlying region is allowed a spear to drive off lions. We agree then that you are guilty of carrying a murderous implement I have here before me. Next, you are accused of wearing clothes. What do you say?" Vakar tugged at his hair. "What? Do not tell me that, that too is illegal. Why can you not let folks do as they please?" "If such a shocking anachronistic suggestion were followed, we could never maintain our standard of ethics. Clothes are worn for 3 reasons: warmth, vanity, and false modesty. Gamphasentia is warm enough to make them unnecessary, and vanity is such an obvious sin that we need not discuss it. As for the third motive, found in some barbarous nations, the gods made the human body pure and holy in all of its parts, and it is therefore an insult to them to cover any part as if it is shameful. We will therefore agree that you have worn clothes, but we are just people. If you object to this trial or the conduct thereof, speak before sentences pass." Vakar cried, "I do indeed have something to say. I could have skirted your country, but choose to enter it instead of warn you of deadly danger." "What is that?" "Do you know of the Gwendulians, a barbarian tribe, I believe, who live far in the east around Lake Zama? What about them?" "A great army of Gwendulians are nearing Gamphasentia across the Tamaruf on camels to assail and plunder you." "How do you know this?" Vakar told him of a seance in the throne room of King Awakas. The judge pulled his scanty beard and said, "It might or might not be true, but it makes a little difference." "Little difference? The difference between life and death? No, you do not understand us. We deem it unethical to oppose aggressors by force. Why, we might cause the death of one of these Gwendulians. If they come, we shall show them that there is nothing worth stealing, no gold, nor jewels, or fine raiments, or such gewgaws, except food, which we might have for asking. Then we shall courteously ask them to leave, confident that, faced by our greatness of soul, they will do so." "Oh, is that so?" Judge, the usual wont of such robbers is to kill first and discuss ethics afterwards. If you do not, the gods will take care of us. Once previously raiders came out of the eastern desert, and before they reached our land a sandstorm overwhelmed them and killed a lot. Another time, as an army of Gorgons marched upon the Kutan River and attacked us, and the plague smote them with the marshes, so only a few fled back to the Gorgades. However, we cannot continue this interesting discussion because I have other cases to judge. I find you guilty and sentence you both to a place in the arena this afternoon with the 8 men Nij. And then, that will happen, which will happen, take them away. Ha! Shouted Varkar. You speak so virtually have never taken life, but if you shove me into a pit with the monster, it is the same thing. The attendants dragged Vakar, still shouting, out of the courtroom and back to his cell. That's the scene about the sentencing, and all that. I found it very amusing because, well, if you look enough of the human past, you may not find that level of stupidity all at once, but it is, but you do find that type of thinking throughout various parts of history. You may even find it today. So I don't know why he's getting upset about here. Case in point, back when I when I was in college, I had a class about the Renaissance of Europe. And we were studying humanism. Now, one of the keystones of humanism is the rediscovering of Cicero. And there was a time where scholars were seriously debating. They loved Cicero so much, and they hold him in such high regard, that they were discussing that if there were words in the Latin language that Cicero did not use in his writings, it should never be used. So the scene of the pacifist culture, as ridiculous sounding as it is, the type of thinking is found in humanity more often than you think. And I think this is just Sprague, deCamp taking such ideas and concentrating in one form to what we would find a ridiculous level for humorous effect. Again, humor being subjective, your mileage is going to vary. This is an older one. This would probably have better laughs as far as humorous fantasy at the time. But I don't think it's worthy of critique just because it didn't make him laugh. You shouldn't read this. It's, art is subjective, and as long as that's true, I can never say where it is with absolute any work that I present or anyone else presents is good or bad. With that said, I would, for those of you who want to read classic fantasies, Tritonian Ring, hey, if you're an old grognard, like old-fashioned D&D with, this is probably a good source to have on the type of adventures you can go about or how adventures can be set up. Without going to Dungeons and Dragons novels that, are derivatives of that. This is the stuff that it came from. Sprague, deCamp was, as an author, was mentioned in Gary Gygax's Appendix N, from what I was able to look up. Not necessarily this story, but this could work along with this, as long as with our works of Sprague, deCamp. So, as far as a good simple adventure goes. And it also gives a good idea of role-playing within the world in the context of this. So for if you want to go some resources outside D&D of what D&D can be in the classic sense, yeah, go with this one. So, that's it. Tritonian Ring by Sprague, deCamp. Thank you all for watching. You have a nice day.